Welcome everybody, Tableau enthusiasts far and wide, to the TC21 and to this session hosted by MIP and the Data School. My name is Luke Beacon and we are gathered here today to talk about UI and UX and its applications in analytics. So the title of today's session is Moving Beyond Pretty, basically meaning that I want to show you ways that you can enhance your Tableau dashboards with user experience principles and hopefully elevate your work beyond just pretty. Now, color is a big part of Tableau. We all know that. And unfortunately, when you use color or add things like menus and filter panes, people can often dismiss these efforts by saying, I don't care how pretty it is, I just want the numbers. Um, well, it's a very unfortunate situation, but I'm here to say that that is wrong. And often the design of a dashboard can enhance the usability and ultimately improve the insights derived from your dashboards. So I want to talk about a few things. First is form versus function. What is the interplay with these ideas in analytics and dashboarding? I'll briefly touch on UI and UX design and what they are before showing you my top 5 principles from those fields and how they apply to analytics and hopefully can help enhance your dashboards. I also want to touch on Data Inc., something you might have heard of, but if you haven't heard of it, it may very well change your life in regards to developing effective dashboards. And then I have some examples of how UI elements can elevate your dashboard, and also how and where to draw inspiration from external sources. So let's get stuck in. Function over form. You may have heard this before. You may have even said it before. It's a mantra repeated by all great dashboard and report developers, and for good reason. But does this principle mean that form should suffer? Well, in many cases, when developing dashboards, particularly those that exploit visual analytics, like Tableau dashboards, form is function. But, well, okay, more specifically, the right form can be function. So the thoughtful application of user experience design principles can enhance the usability of your dashboards and ultimately improve the ability of users to extract insights and information, which is the ultimate goal of a dashboard after all. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that you should make your dashboard look good before making it function. But these two are not mutually exclusive, and often what is perceived as looking good is actually just good functional design in practice. Good design's kind of like a janitor. If they're doing their job well, then you won't even know that they're there. Everything's just clean all the time. The best way, though, with dashboards to know if your design is working properly, consult the most important person in the dashboard equation, the user. The user is important. The saddest situation is a talented developer such as yourself spending hours on a dashboard that just ends up sitting there unused and becoming part of the wallpaper. This often happens, unfortunately, because the user was not consulted, and they're the ones who can tell you if you're going down the wrong path or whether you're nailing it. And you don't want to know that right at the end. You want to know that before. So, users are too frequently ignored, and developers create reports according to what is possible with the data rather than what is needed from the data, which can lead to a few things. First of all, overcomplication. It can lead to straying from the intended focal point. Superfluous features, it can lead to information that isn't needed. But worst of all, it can lead to wasted time. So consult the user, but we also need to make sure, of course, that once the user is getting the information they need, then We need to make sure that they are getting it in the most effective way possible. So this is where user experience design comes in. UI, UX. You might have heard this before. They're two acronyms that are often packaged into the one deal, but they are separate streams. There's UI design, which stands for user interface design. And this is typically concerned with the aesthetic parts of design. So things such as typography, images, colors, shapes, and other visual design elements. Overall, UI is about the look and feel, which is often what makes people dismiss it as just making things pretty. But the hero of the day is UX design, or user experience design. And this is the act of designing the overall experience of the individuals or groups utilizing your dashboard that you have developed. This includes things such as navigation, performance, layout, structure, functionality, consistency, quality, other elements as well that you may not consciously process, but add to an overall positive experience. So that's what UI and UX are. There are lots of principles that go into it. This is an entire stream of work. There are people whose job it is just to optimize the UI and UX, or just the UX. So there's lots of principles. I want to talk about the top 5 UI and UX principles, according to me, with applications in analytics. So number 1 is number 1 because it's my favorite. It's called progressive disclosure, and it's all about hiding unnecessary information or functionality from the users until they want to see it or use it, but giving them obvious hints about how they can get that information. It's basically about decluttering your dashboards to reduce that cognitive load and thereby allowing your users to focus on what is important, using your dashboard to get information. Now, the best example I actually have of progressive disclosure is not in Tableau at all. In fact, it's the Apple Weather app. When you first open this app, it provides you with all of the information that you would want, probably about 95% of the time. The temperature now, in the future, and rain forecasts, and some things like temperature ranges and type of temperature. Most people wouldn't really need much more than this information. However, with a simple scroll, you can get access to information such as the UV index, the sunset time, the humidity percentage, etc. A whole bunch more as well, pressure. This information is needed by the users of this app probably less than 5% of the time. Think about if all of this information was stuffed into the top of this app without scrolling. It would just be a big mess and it would be a lot less useful, right? It's the same with dashboards. So if you stuff everything into one big page, it confuses and overwhelms your users. Here are some examples of progressive disclosure and how it can be used in Tableau. First is Viz in Tooltip. If you aren't already using this, then you should be. Tooltips themselves are a great example of progressive disclosure, only showing the info, the extra info on the tooltip when you hover. But Viz in Tooltip can amplify this by adding even more information, like such as putting an overtime chart on the tooltip. There's also dashboard navigation, to get another example. So you don't need to stuff everything onto a single dashboard. You can have a summary dashboard with one pertinent chart area and then have a button that links people to a deeper dive dashboard in that subject area. For example, this chart here on the bottom left is from Google Analytics, part of a broader dashboard on users and visitors' site performance. It shows the most important information on active users, but allows you to go to an entire other report just about active users. So I use this all the time. All you have to do is click a button and you've got a whole bunch more information about active users. But if all you need to know is the number in the last 1, 7, and 30 days, over time, then that chart can give it to you. Another example is using show hide containers to house things like filters and parameters. Lots of people know about this one. It's just another example of progressive disclosure. Most filters and parameters don't get changed all that frequently and can be hidden until needed. So this actually, I think, might be one of the main reasons why Tableau actually released the show hide container feature in the first place. Speaking of which, by the way, since 2021.2, Tableau desktop and server, you can now add show hide container buttons for tiled containers, not just floating containers. So hopefully that'll add some extra pizzazz to your dashboards. The second UI/UX principle that I want to talk about today is the Doherty Threshold. I think this is a principle that most of us can relate to. It basically means that the productivity is greatly enhanced when the computer responds to your input within 400 milliseconds. You don't want your dashboards to take 10 seconds to return the information. Although the Doherty threshold is technically 400 milliseconds, I think there's a bit of leeway when it comes to dashboards built in your business that is crunching your data. It's potentially millions or billions of rows of data. But I always aim for under 2 seconds. So if you change your filter, it should respond within 2 seconds. Or if you change tabs, it should load within 2 seconds. Now, what this means is that the performance of your dashboard really matters, and it's incredibly important. It's something that you should be monitoring from the get-go when developing your dashboard. And if you're working with lots of data, then maybe you need to roll it up. If you have performance issues, there's lots of things you can try, but this is the best resource out there, hands down. This is the best resource. This is a white paper from Tableau. It's by Ben Busili and Matt Hughes from UIUX, and it's based on the groundbreaking work by Alan Eldridge. It's the absolute Bible for performance of Tableau dashboards. Give it a Google. It's designing efficient production dashboards is what it's called. Put a cup of tea on, give it a read. You will not regret it. Your dashboards will increase in speed greatly after you consult this. Third UX principle is Jacob's Law, named after Jacob Nielsen of Nielsen. You might have heard of Nielsen before. This is the idea that users transfer their expectations from experiences elsewhere onto your dashboard. Now, it mainly relates to websites, and it states that the majority of users' time is spent on other websites. So when they enter your site, they generally expect it to function in a similar manner. But this applies to dashboards too. There are lots of dashboards in your business and outside of your business. You don't want them to all function differently and have different terminology. So this means that people transfer their expectations when the dashboards appear similar. And I think you'll agree that most dashboards appear somewhat similar because they're all dashboards. So users will often have the same expectations around functionality. We can exploit this though to create superior experiences by ensuring consistency among our suite of dashboards. We can also ensure that our users can focus on the insights and not have to waste time learning how to use your dashboard just because it's built differently from the others. This applies to things like interactivity, the UI elements that you use, the way your filters are applied, the layout of your dashboard, all sorts of things. Some examples, consistently applying your cross-filtering. So you can kind of condition your users to know that when they click on a graph, it will filter the other graphs on the dashboard. Using similar UI elements such as filter panes or menus. Similarly, ensuring that your dashboards have similar layouts so that there isn't too much inconsistency with where your bands are or how the tables are laid out, for example. I follow this principle of having different levels of dashboards. Like we saw earlier with the Google Analytics active users report, if I have a summary dashboard, I'll also generally have a more detailed dashboards for people to explore the data in greater detail, and my users generally expect to be able to drill down. Preattentive attributes is the fourth idea that I want to explore, and these actually are the driving force behind why Tableau is the way that it is. These are the visual properties that we as humans can process almost immediately before sending that information to the attention processing parts of the brain. That is, they are pre-attentive. They exploit our ability as humans to detect patterns in things. This means that users can extract information at a light speed pace before they even realize it. So we as developers want to exploit these attributes to extract the most out of our dashboards. And these are the primary pre-attentive attributes. You'll notice that they're roughly aligned with the way that Tableau presents data. Length of bars, width of bars, the size of marks, shape marks, color hue, color intensity. These are all things that you can use to add additional information to your graph. Number 5, finally, we have the law of common region. This states that elements tend to be perceived as groups when they are within a clearly defined boundary. This is useful not only for charts, but for grouping elements onto a dashboard. For example, you can group a set of charts that are closely related to each other within a bordered container. Or what I often do is group a graph with related elements like a title and a drill down button and a parameter that only applies to that graph, or a legend, for example. But it's basically grouping elements onto a dashboard. So here's an example. You can see that the background of the dashboard is gray, and we're grouping elements into containers, and we have things like titles and little info icons and legends. And we're grouping those based on the background of the container being white. So, it gives a bit of a clean look, and it mimics a lot of applications out there, actually. I think you see a lot of websites out there that look like this when they present a dashboard. Some honorable mentions that I wanted to talk about briefly without talking about them too much. The aesthetic usability effect states that users often perceive aesthetically pleasing things as more usable things. Perhaps the macOS and Apple products in general are good examples of this. The F pattern, the phenomenon where people, mainly Western people, that read something will read in F pattern. That is, their eyes move from the top left to the top right, and then down a little bit, and then from left to right again, and then all the way down. It kind of looks like an F. There's also the sweet spot. So eye tracking studies that were conducted by Tableau found this to be true for dashboards. It shows that users generally look at the top left-ish area of a dashboard first, and for the longest amount of time. So that's the sweet spot. That's where you should put your most impactful piece of information, top left. The next topic I want to talk about is Data Inc. Data Inc. is a massive principle actually in dashboard design, and really needs to be talked about whenever we discuss optimizing design. So it was introduced by Edward Tufte in his 1983 classic book, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. In that book, he states that Data Inc. is the non-erasable core of a graphic or a graph. So Tufte asserts that in displaying data, we should remove all non-data inc as well as redundant data inc within reason to increase the data inc ratio and create a sound graphical design. What on earth does that even mean? That's a little bit confusing and a bit jargonish, but it basically means remove things that don't absolutely need to be there. Things that need to be there essentially boil down to the things that convey information. So the name is a little bit odd, Data Inc. It's a very weird name for what it is, But if you think about it, it actually comes from the days where people were literally drawing graphs on paper or printing them. So the name actually refers to the ink used on paper and how much of that ink is actually necessary in telling the story that you're trying to tell. So it wasn't really about being environmentally friendly, saving ink and saving paper. It was about ensuring that you have a simple representation of the message that you're trying to send. So there are two types of data ink that you want to look to erase within reason. Non-data ink are things that don't add information or don't actually convey any data or insight. I'll show some examples of that shortly. And redundant data ink, very similar to the idea of double encoding. It's where you are representing the same piece of information with two or more visual elements. So some examples. This is a bar chart, and it's not really ideal. I think you'll agree. I'm sure some of you can spot what is wrong here. There's some non-data ink in the sense that, all right, there's some distracting backgrounds. There are some grid lines that may not be all that useful. There's also redundant data ink. There's axis labels, and the chart title will kind of tell you the same information, that it's calories and that it's different foods. The x-axis label type of food is a little bit redundant in the sense that it's pretty obvious that those are different types of foods. French fries is not a type of pet, so it's clearly a type of food. Your color and the axis labels, so French fries is blue, potato chips is green, bacon is red. I mean, that doesn't mean anything. Why is potato chips green? So, the color links exactly to what the label is. And so you're encoding the same information two different ways. Similarly with the legend. I mean, it tells you that French fries is blue, but I already know that because French fries has the label and the bar is colored blue. So why do I need that extra legend? It's just redundant and duplicate information. So we can rearrange things and also essentially remove the y-axis as well, and you end up with something like this. A much simpler version that conveys all of the same information. We don't need the axis anymore because we have shown all the numbers in a label instead. And we've actually added information by changing the color to be a highlight color. So now bacon is being called out because I guess bacon is best. That shows that if you remove your redundant and non-data ink, there are actually opportunities for you to add additional information to your chart. Another example here with a table. There's a lot of redundant information here in the role column, duplicated values. The name column is being a little bit too short in width, so it's causing the rows to wrap to double line rows. The numbers aren't formatted. We have to redundant decimal places. There's a bit too much precision there with the number of fans. Do we really need to know that it's 988,551, or do we mainly care that it's 988,000? There's a few things to go on here, but you can change it to something a little bit more simple like this, bit of a cleaner version. We've merged some cells, we've grouped information with properly formatted numbers, and there's a bit more of a clear highlight as well. Remove some of the backgrounds and stuff. Another bar chart example with a lot of junk. So we've got gradients here on the bars that don't mean anything. We've got the little icons hovering over there, which is the same thing as the axis label. Make that a little bit more simple, like so. Another table here with just a lot going on. We can do a lot here to fix this up. We can unify the row heights, unify the column widths. We can align the numbers. We can align the text. We can do vertical alignment. We can remove those ugly background fills. The grid lines are a little bit too unnecessary there, and they're a little bit too bold. So we remove most of the grid lines. The ones that we have left will make it a little bit more discreet. We can remove the over-the-top bolding and emphasis of the titles up top. A lot of zeros going on there as well. We can probably get rid of those because they're a little bit redundant. The font is a serif font, which makes it a little bit more difficult to understand. So we'll change that to a sans serif. We can sort and group the rows and columns, as well as utilize white space a little bit more, and we end up with something like this. A lot cleaner, a lot easier to understand. I also want to just briefly talk about the types of UI elements that you can add to your dashboards to take them to the next level and practice some of the things that we've discussed here today. First of all, filter panes. We've talked about them already. Use show and hide containers to practice your progressive disclosure. Add your filters and parameters to a hidden container, and that can be shown and hidden with a button. It's one of the first things I do if I have one or two filters, or more than two filters on my dashboard, which is most times. You can create menus, navigation menus that is. You can use show hide containers if you want, but you can also just do it on your dashboard. You can, so navigation buttons, you can make the menu look like a website if you like. I've got an example of that in a second. You can also create buttons. So you can use sheets as well as parameter and set actions to create custom buttons to do things such as navigate or reset a parameter or set a parameter to a pre-specified value. You can change levels of aggregation. You can change graphs on a dashboard. You can do heaps with sheets and parameter actions. There's a lot you can do. Give it a try. You can also create help and info dialogues. So you can utilize show and hide containers or tooltips as well on a sheet to create additional information about a dashboard, things like definitions or instructions. And you don't really want this information to be cluttering your dashboard at all times because people don't need it at all times. So it's a perfect use for show hide containers. Here are some examples. Filter pane here on the left shows, we've got all our filters, and the little X there will hide that whole pane. Menus here, I've got an example of one I built a little while ago where it kind of looks like a website menu, and you can change it to look like you're interacting with a website. It even highlights which one you've selected. Buttons, examples of resetting back to default dates, maybe the latest date in the data once you've changed the date filter. Help and info examples here where you have a semi-transparent overlay that shows you how to utilize the dashboard, gives you some instructions. Just some examples, but there's lots more other examples out there, so go give them a try. Finally, I just want to talk about design inspiration, and more importantly, like where to get your inspiration and what to aim for. So this is what I like to show people and tell people. This is what people want. This is what I think people want. Those that use your dashboards, really, even if it's subconsciously, they want to be John Anderton from the Minority Report. If you haven't seen that movie, it's a great movie. It's from 2001, I think. Great movie. But there's a scene in here where they have this transparent screen and he's using these gloves to like interact with it. And he's like this amazing analyst and he's doing it. But this is what people want. They want a dashboard that is so intuitive that they can use those little glove things that they have in Minority Report. We're a little bit away from, maybe 10 years or so away from transparent screens and using wild gestures like this, but that doesn't mean that your users can't fluidly and intuitively interact with your dashboards kind of like this. So it's really just an example of, if your users expect once they click on a graph for it to cross filter, then you should make it do that. You don't want people to run into things that are unintuitive. The things we've talked about today are really just principles to guide you. You don't need to come up with all of your own designs, by the way. You can use other dashboards or even applications as inspiration for your dashboard. Like Jacob's law said, the people that interact with your dashboard will expect it to be similar to others. So if you get your inspiration from websites or apps or other dashboards or Tableau Public or whatever it is, then people will be more comfortable with your dashboard. So don't be afraid to copy or utilize or get inspiration from designs that have been used elsewhere successfully. Like Google Analytics is a good example of that. Overall, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've learned a thing or two about UIUX and how it's applied in Tableau and analytics in general. I hope your dashboards become more and more user-friendly as time goes on. Enjoy the rest of the Tableau conference. I am Luke Beacon from MIP, wishing you all the best. Thank you and goodbye.